my next guest. Jonathan Portes is a former chief economist in the UK Cabinet Office and now director of the National Institute for Economic and Social Research. Joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to speak to us. So just want to be clear about this. You're saying that the economy is too fragile to withstand spending cuts now. Does that mean that you're not so much opposed to the actual spending cuts so much as the timing of these cuts?
Yes, that's right. There's no doubt that over time the UK needs a credible fiscal consolidation plan, but that doesn't mean that the pace of the cuts is correct. It would be better for the economy if the cuts were spread out over a longer period, in particular not front-loaded to the extent to which they are at a time when the economy is still quite weak.
And when you say, the economy is weak at the moment, we've had some pretty poor economic data recently, including growth that is pretty much flat, at least that's what the figures indicate, which seems to suggest a slowdown. But you've also pointed out that this is partly down to factors outside of the government's control, right?
That's right. It's partly due to the international environment, in particular the rise in oil prices. But there's absolutely no doubt that fiscal policy is having a dragging effect on growth, and in particular on consumer confidence and consumer demand.
I mean, the letter describes a road to recovery as being a long, hard slog. So, I mean, even if the government were to pursue the alternatives that you describe, the clampdown on tax evasion, higher taxes on the rich to create jobs and growth, investment in green technologies, I guess there's no guarantee that this would necessarily create economic growth either, is there?
Well, first I should say that I didn't actually sign the letter. I was quoted in the Observer story correctly as saying that the government should slow the pace of spending cuts, but the letter was nothing to do with me.
No, you're not a signatory, that's right.
But there's no doubt that we are in for uncomfortable times regardless of the, that's right. So even if the government were to change policy, I'm not saying that we would suddenly have very fast growth overnight. But I think that a slower and more measured pace to deficit reduction would mean that we would see faster growth in output and employment over the short to medium term, and that would be good for the economy and good for society more widely.
I mean, I guess the Tories argue that the state of Britain's finances were left pretty much crippled by Labour, and that these cuts need to be made in order to maintain the country's credibility in the markets. Do you buy that argument?
No, I don't buy that at all, and there really is very little actual evidence to support that. We saw, for example, that when S&P put the US government's credit rating on negative watch for some reason known only to themselves, that actually long-term interest rates in the US have fallen since that happened. There really is the UK, as I said, needs to get its fiscal house in order over the medium to long term. But there is plenty of room for manoeuvre in the short term on fiscal policy that will not affect the government's credibility with the markets. The UK has a long maturity debt. Interest rates are at historically extremely low levels. This is really not based on any evidence whatsoever. So
then the risks, with that in mind, the risks of the government does continue to pursue this strategy, a double dip?
Well, we at the National Institute are not predicting a double dip as our central forecast. What we are predicting is growth remaining below trend and hence unemployment at best constant and quite possibly rising. That in itself is pretty bad. But we can't discount the risk of a double dip. That's clearly a risk. It's a risk in our forecast, and indeed it's a risk in the Treasury and the Office of Budget Responsibility forecast as well.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan Portes of the National Institute for Economic and Social Research. Thanks very much.